Hello, and welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. If you register for the Voice Interaction Design course by October 16th, 2020, you will be eligible for a 15% discount on course fees. Enter the code DALAUNCH for your discount. That's DALAUNCH. We'll include these details in the show notes. In today's episode, Sina Kahen, a voice design strategist, talks about how to approach the voice design strategy. The key thing for organizations to remember is that there has to be a why behind your voice strategy. Developing a chatbot or voice assistant for the sake of it and without a strategy will lead to failure. Next, Sina takes us through the voice strategy process he uses. Sina is interviewed by host Sheila Cahill. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, Sina. Welcome to The Future is Spoken.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation about voice strategy today. And before we jump into that, can you tell us about yourself and your background and your company as well?
Absolutely. So I am a biomedical scientist by trade, graduated over 10 years ago now, went into the medtech world, working for an orthopedic devices company in the medical device world, starting in sales, started to grow into product management, and then international business development, and then innovation. And it was really within the innovation side of my experience in the medtech world that I came across voice technology, seeing how voice can be used in the setting of an operating room, given the fact that an operating room is sterile. And then when I started my MBA just over 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago now, is when I got exposed to the world of voice assistants, digital assistants. And that's when I and 9 other of my MBA cohort members at Imperial College decided to put together Vaice, which started as a pro bono consulting group, going out there to brands such as BBC, O2, Lego, providing them with some tips on what the heck this voice assistant can even do for them and their customers. And then once the MBA was over, the pro bono glamorous work experience was over, we decided to establish the company as more of a thought leadership and educational entity, really, that is out there providing frameworks for both voice strategy and design. And here we are today.
That's a fascinating journey. And it sounds as though that pro bono work basically gave you a ticket to contact these big brand names, yeah?
It was exactly that. What we realized was early in the MBA, when we were learning about emerging technologies, we came across voice as being this new emerging tech, which was on its own island, if you like. And then there's another island, which are all the users and the potential prospects, such as brands, companies that can actually utilize this technology. But these two entities were in two totally separate islands. And in between the island of voice and the island of companies and brands was this ocean of unknown, if you like. And so we decided, what if we were able to bridge this gap between these two islands for free? And once we were able to do that, build up the brand equity within the conversational AI and voice tech world, and from there, see how we can consult brands in the long term.
Good stuff. And was part of bridging that gap what you would call today the voice strategy process?
So I think it's kind of, there's 2 levels. The main level that we kind of met brands on and try to have like the discussions on with brands was on why voice should even be something they should entertain. At the end of the day, brands are being exposed to so many different emerging technologies, from VR to AR, chatbots. So going through consumer journeys with the brands, trying to determine exactly what products and services they have was the first step. So getting to know the brand was really the first step before we even discussed voice as being a solution. So as you mentioned, voice strategy for us on the first primal level, if you like, most of the time you're spending on determining whether voice is a fit for the digital strategy of a company. So that's like the high level, if you like. And then once you determine there is a fit there for the company or brand, you then kind of dig into the weeds and create a strategy for your voice application. So that's the second level. So the bridging the gap is kind of like the first level of finding out the why. The second level is more about the how.
Good. Thanks for that. I think that really helps clarify some listeners' thinking. And before we jump into the question why, which is a really big and important one, can you define for us voice strategy?
So voice in and of itself, it's brandished a lot as a word by itself, but I think it's in the context of technology and emerging technology, especially voice has come to mean voice technology, a voice user interface, a device that you're able to interact with, which understands you via your voice, and not always respond to you via a voice, but essentially you interacting on your terms, not on the computer's terms, such as a keyboard. So that's the voice side of it. And strategy, as we know, it's a lot of different words and terms associated with it, such as tactics, planning. But what I like to think of when I put those two words together, I like to think of really determining the why and the how. And that's why I like to call two-level voice strategy. So the first level, as I mentioned, is the why, and the second level is the how. So that's how I look at voice strategy, which isn't the most clear-cut definition, but it's associated with those two separate levels.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you made, Sina, because people often mix up strategy and tactic, don't they? Like a tactic is kind of a one or a number of tactics to execute the strategy. So if you don't know how from the big picture point of view and the why, you're not going to be able to create the strategy, yeah?
Yes, exactly. But I still do think there are certain elements of how within strategy, which is why I'm very much fond of defining strategy both in the how and the why. I just think they're just two different steps of strategy. Some people like to just focus strategy on how, and some like to focus it just on the why. But I think depending on the stage you're at with adopting or utilizing a process, a technology, any initiative, strategy has both a why and a how.
Okay, so we've defined voice and we've defined strategy. Now we're putting them together. Perhaps the best way of exploring this is maybe giving us an example of the way in which you've worked with a client. How do you approach it? How do you get people to start thinking about the why? Because everyone wants to jump in and start doing.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, it's spending time figuring out what kind of products and services the brand is providing. So whether it's a high involvement product or service or a low involvement product or service. And high involvement products and services come with high involvement in the sense of, they're high risk, social risk, economic risk, health risk, and they take a lot of cognitive load to determine the decision-making process, such as, for example, life insurance. That's a high involvement product. It's not something you just make a decision off the cuff and commit to. A low involvement product or service is obviously something that comes with lower involvement, lower risk as well, where it's kind of like the pan of drink you pick up when you're out for a fast food meal. Determining whether you fit into that high involvement or low involvement category is one of the steps of determining how voice is relevant to your product or service. Why? Because if it's a high involvement product, such as life insurance, it's not something that you would really use voice for, maybe to gather some information, but not for the purchase stage. If it's a low involvement product or service, then that obviously is something you could use voice for because people don't have to see things. It could be a very quick decision that you make and there's not that much risk, which is why you're willing to make that decision quicker. That's just one of the ways we look at the why. And the second way really is to actually map out the consumer journey. So whatever consumer journey a brand has at the time for an acquisition of their product by a customer, the pre-purchase stage where they're finding out information about the product, to the purchase stage where they actually acquire the product, to the post-purchase stage, beyond actually buying the product, the experience they have post-purchase, mapping that out and seeing what are the touch points the company has with a customer at each of those stages, whether it's web, mobile, in-store, an app, seeing the friction points at each of those stages currently in the current consumer journey. Then we're able to see where voice, with the benefits that it has, can provide a solution at one of those stages within the consumer journey, which will ultimately enhance the future consumer journey. So those are just two examples of how we're able to identify whether voice is a fit at all for the company.
So you look at the level of involvement of the client or the person, the individual who's making the purchase, and then you can determine how complex the strategy might be. To use your example with insurance, with life insurance, you might have one or two questions to guide them through the funnel and then connect them with an associate who can help them with that.
Indeed. So it could be, for example, just generating some sort of awareness about your product or service. So, you booking a holiday, it may not be that you book it via voice interaction, via this Alexa or Google Assistant, but you are willing to use a voice assistant to just get some information before you get onto your computer to actually visualize the holiday and see the pictures and see the information that you need to make a decision. Because at the end of the day, things like booking a holiday, such as a holiday package especially, that does require a bit more cognitive load. And you can't really expect the customer to make a decision for something that heavy via just a voice interaction. So it's really important to know your product and service, what kind of involvement level it is, to then determine what elements of voice can actually be beneficial for your customer.
Mm-hmm. And do you encounter businesses or organizations that think that voice can do absolutely everything, and that they, even if it's a heavy load product?
I can't stand it.
Really? Tell us about that.
I come across that quite a few times. I think voice is the cure to everything, all problems. It kind of reminds me when the microwave came out. Everybody thought that's it. You don't need a stove. You don't need an oven. You don't need fire anymore. Just chuck it in the microwave. It will do everything. No, it's I think a lot of that is based on a message that the voice community was pushing initially, which was voice first. Everything you use, voice first. Not web first, not mobile first, voice first. And I think that put the expectations really, really high, and it made a lot of companies think that it can do everything. But actually, voice ended up being just like the microwave, a part of the kitchen, but not the core. But it's definitely an element, an interface that you can interact with for certain things, and that doesn't diminish the value of it. The broadness of something doesn't give it a value. It's really the utility and the value that it provides for a specific thing can be enough. And that's why I like to push the idea of convenience first when I'm speaking with clients, not voice first, in the sense that depending on the stage the customer is at in your consumer journey, what is the most convenient touch point for that customer? Is it voice? Is it mobile? Is it coming in store? Is it picking up the phone? Is it web? So yes, there are clients out there who think that voice will just replace their mobile applications and their websites, but that's very short-sighted.
It's too much of a leap.
Yes, too much of a leap, and it's just not using the technology for what it is. That's not what it's designed to do.
And I suppose it's not taking into account that the fact that we are all humans with our quirks and preferences, and we all want different approaches to different things, don't we?
Absolutely, and it's tapping into a lot of our primal drives of individual preferences. But fundamentally, voice is really there to kind of remove friction, to add a little bit of personality to content, and all in all, provide a more personable experiences when we're interacting with our technological interfaces that have impacted our mental health to such an extent that having a voice associated with it might actually improve our mental states.
Yeah, hopefully. So, I mean, a a big lesson there a big point there for any learner who's looking at going to the Digital Assistant Academy and taking voice interaction design is that they're going to be educating clients when they begin their work. They have to focus on that consulting role.
Fundamental. Before I always think of it in the context of psychology. Before a therapist gives any sort of advice, which they're not even advised to do, they get to know the person first. And I think one of the biggest problems we have in the consulting world is that we kind of skip that step, and we try to have these packaged solutions that we sell for the sake of scalability. We forget that each situation is different, and it's important to understand the details of that client in particular and see how voice fits into their general existence.
Yeah, so important. So can you tell us a little bit about what kinds of questions you might ask a new client when you encounter them and they're all excited and enthusiastic about building some kind of voice? I don't even know what the word is. What do they build on the client end? A chatbot or an assistant?
Yeah. So you've got this conversational AI umbrella term. And within that conversational AI umbrella term, you've got chatbots and voice assistants. So they're both digital assistants. One of them has a voice, or you can utilize your voice to interact with it. The other one, it's via text, and it responds to you via text. And the kind of questions that we really ask is, again, really delving into what it is that they do, what makes them unique as a product or service and as a brand. What are the things they're doing within their existing customer journey? And voice really comes in at the end of the conversation. I'll be honest. There are times where with clients, we've had to say voice isn't a solution for you. You can have something such as a voice application for the sake of having it. There may be something there for generating awareness, a marketing campaign. There are things there, what we call the one night stand use cases, and we can utilize them. But voice really comes in at the end of our interactions with end of the initial interactions with a brand, because most of the time, most of the questions in that initial stage are based upon getting to know the brands, the products, the services. And then do we start delving into what do they think they can get from voice, and what are the kind of ROI they want to see from something like a voice application that they'll be developing.
Well, that's quite unusual for a consultant, isn't it, Sina? That you might say that to a client, and some consultants they would never say that. Well, if the client wants it, we have to give it to them. It's what the customer wants, even though we think it's not a good fit. So you're taking quite. I think
one of the reasons we did that is because we were all working full time. It's a part-time project for us.
Yeah.
So for us, it means that it's. I'm not trying to say consultants push it just because they want to make money, but at the end of the day, when your monthly income is dependent upon it, you do first ask questions later. Whereas when it's not, and it's something like a passion project, you're able to really focus on producing valuable solutions as opposed to template scaled solutions for so many different clients. So that's I think one of the benefits of having your part-time project and part-time hustle.
I'm sure that's true, and good for you to admit that. But I'm sure there's an element of you that thinks, I'm glad we're doing the right thing, and your clients are going to remember you for that, and you'll have to keep that ethos within your company when you grow it.
Yes, I mean the first drive we had was because we were in love with what we thought the technology could do. So that's why we were really keen on seeing the technology at its best and not the technology at its most profitable. So voice at the end of the day came and shattered the idea that branding was all visual. I remember watching a video when I first got exposed to voice assistants and hearing NYU, New York University professor Scott Galloway saying how decades and decades companies have been spending billions on building their visual brand, but now with this little voice assistant, they're going to have to start thinking about their auditory brand. What do we sound like? Do we have a high-pitched voice, low-pitched voice? We male, female? There's just so many questions to unpack with this new audio era that we're going into. that's why that passion for answering those questions allowed us to focus on the best use cases.
Now, I know we've digressed a little bit from voice strategy, but I found the digressions really, really interesting. And I think the listeners will too. But let's go back to, so you've consulted with a potential client, you've got, lots of information about the why and what they hope for, and, everything about their company and the people there. Now you're heading back to your office and you've got to put together some kind of strategy, let's say for a medium cognitive load product. What are you going to do now?
So at that stage, we would get together the team, mainly strategists, and we get the designers involved. Developers aren't involved at that stage because, again, we most of our time is based on coming up with a good idea, and then we kind of pass on the good idea for them to either do outsource it to a developer, or use their in-house developer that we're seeing more and more companies have for voice and chatbots. But we'll get the team together and try to determine, based on where they're sitting within that matrix of high involvement, low involvement, affective or cognitive kind of matrix, what kind of ideas can we come up with that could actually provide some value at a particular journey, at a particular stage within the customer journey. So we'll pretend like we're each at this particular stage of that journey, and start determining exactly what kind of interactions do we have right now with a given brand at that journey. And given the experience that we have with voice and the utility that we know voice can provide, we start coming up with ideas for a voice application or a voice-based feature at a given stage for that brand. And then that's really start pitching the ideas to the brand. And once they're happy with the idea, is then when we go into design and development.
Could you give us an example or two of the kind of ideas that you might come up with?
Yes. So one of them is, for example, a probiotic company where they provide probiotic supplements. And one of the challenges with with a probiotic industry is that there are so many different types. People don't really know which one's good for what kind of situation that you're trying to solve internally. And one of the things we try to do is kind of create this question and answer environment within this voice application where the user will activate the brand's voice application on a voice assistant. And the app will ask a series of questions about the person, get to know the person, and then almost like a recommendation service, link them to the ideal type of probiotic given their priorities and preferences. And then you can tie in things like, we'll send you samples, or go straight to purchase. If their Amazon Pay account is connected or Google Pay account is connected, they can actually go ahead and make that purchase there. So that's an example of kind of a medium involvement because it's health-based, but at the end of the day, it's something that comes with low risk because probiotics aren't like, antibiotics or other forms of medicine, if you like, that can have potentially risky impacts to your health. So that's an idea of really like a recommendation service into house, because a lot of people may not even think of going to a Boots to go and ask for the type of probiotics they want, or they may feel uncomfortable speaking about internal issues with someone in Boots. So having that in the privacy of your home, where you say exactly what it is that you are, or the problems that you're having, and having that recommendation service there is something that we saw gained quite a lot of interest by users.
And just for our listeners, in the UK, Boots is a big pharmacy chain. They're probably wondering what Boots is, but yeah.
Exactly. What the hell is Boots?
They must sell shoes there now. That is a really good example, yeah, because as you said, a lot of people don't like going up to the counter and say, oh, I've got a terrible depression and I read that my gut's related to my mood, and, you're just not going to do that, are you? So it's very personal, yeah. So running through the series of questions, yeah, excellent. Any other ideas that you'd like to share on how you've actually worked on a strategy, got information, and then put together some ideas?
Yeah, another thing we look at when we're doing some strategy work is what data sets does the client have? So, data on purchasing habits, data on, for example, a bank has lots of data on how much people are spending on their credit card at a given restaurant. So if you know how much the average spend, if you like, in a restaurant is, you can then provide a quantitative TripAdvisor instead of a qualitative TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor currently is qualitative. People go there, they try it. If they like it, they leave a review. If they don't, they leave a review. Most times they leave a review when they don't like it, and that skews the whole page. But it's very qualitative. But now with knowing that you've got the data set on how much is being spent on average in a given restaurant, you can create a voice application where you are providing the ability for somebody to say, hey, I want to spend $20 tonight. Where can I go around my area where I can get a meal for $20? So you've got this quantitative TripAdvisor where it's recommending restaurants not based on quality, but based on what the average spend is.
Mm-hmm.
And Capital One did something similar to that, and it's something that we pitched to a bank that I can't mention last year, and we're hoping that will be released soon.
Well, that's pretty good, yeah. So very light intensive, yeah. Not really. It's just a quick spend. You're not investing a lot when you're thinking about it. The consumer, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, but the consumer wouldn't even be doing the purchase via the voice application. They would just be getting information again on where do I go to eat, given the fact that I've got $20. Give me a tip. Let's say you go on vacation somewhere.
Yeah.
You pull out your Google Assistant app on your phone and say, hey Google, I've got $20 spent tonight. Where should I go? And then that bank's voice application, given the data it has on average spending at restaurants in that region, it can then advise where to go based on your budget. So budget-based solutions really being provided there. And then there's acquisition-based solutions where you actually are able to make a purchase of a product via voice experience instead of having to go to a store or go online. And again, for low involvement products like batteries, toiletries, sample products that you want to order, things like that, it's an ideal interface to do so with.
So it's really, voice strategy is a fascinating subject, and I can imagine some people taking the Academy's course and thinking, I really want to do a deep dive into this. It's so great, and I want to get into strategy. What kind of books would you recommend? Magazines, perhaps podcasts, resources for people who really get into it?
I would really recommend, there's a book, Wired for Speech by Clifford Nass. It's he's unfortunately passed away now. He was, I think, a Stanford professor who did a ton of studies on the human-computer interaction, especially with regards to voice and what voices are good for which use cases, and all the biological components of voice, etc., evolutionary components of voice. So Wired for Speech has been really fundamental. I call it the Bible of my voice work. So that's a kind of voice-based book that I would dig into. But more, futurist-based books that can help guide strategy, not just for voice, but more generally, it's good to be aware of. I would recommend The Inevitable, which is a book that basically talks about, the 12 technological forces, and that kind of gives some good tips on where voice can fit in to provide a solution for a lot of the pain points we have as a society. So The Inevitable, written by the editor of Wired, Kevin Kelly. So The Inevitable, written by Kevin Kelly. I would recommend that. And the third thing I would recommend is not a particular book, but it's a genre of life, really, and that's philosophy. Something that's really, really influenced a lot of my work is philosophy, because philosophy, I'm Jewish, and my Jewish tradition, philosophy is fundamental, and philosophy really takes you out of the nitty-gritty of the detail of everyday existence and asks the why questions. So I think the philosophical framework is very, very helpful in training designers, developers, strategists to ask more of the why questions and to understand why you're doing what it is that you're doing. So delving into the world of philosophy is definitely something that will allow you to have a bit of more of a bird's eye view, and see if the project you're working on is even something that provides value, or if it's something you're just doing because of the local kind of perceptions that you have. So I definitely recommend delving into some philosophical works to help you help you improve your voice strategy skills.
No, that's great. As you said, it's the why, and perhaps even for the learners, develop your own philosophical framework to work by.
Precisely.
That's great guidance to offer. Any other tips that you'd like to offer before we wrap up this podcast?
I think it's really important for people to challenge assumptions. When we're thinking of voice strategy, when we're thinking of strategy for any technology, we come in with a lot of assumptions. And you can't have it perfect. You can't clarify every assumption, but it's important to challenge as many as you possibly can, because only through challenging assumptions really you get to determine if the need is actually there or not. Because if the need's not there, the project that you're working on is tech driven, and it's not needs driven. And if your project is tech driven, doesn't mean it will always work. But if it's needs driven, it will work, because ultimately what you're doing is finding a solution to address that need. So challenge assumptions and be needs driven. Those are the two main things I would say.
That's great, Sina. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful speaking with you today, and I appreciate your time, because I can imagine that you're quite busy as well.
Thank you. It's always time to share thoughts and ideas with your audience and learn more about the industry together.
Good. And I'm sure listeners to The Future Is Spoken will really appreciate this, because there's lots of value in this interview. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening today. Remember, you can find all the information on how to become a certified voice interaction designer, along with show notes and more, at our website, digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. Pre-register before the Academy's launch in October for a 15% discount by entering the discount code DALAUNCH. That's a 15% discount with the code DALAUNCH. In our next episode, we'll be exploring designing for voices with Brooke Hawkins. Be sure to listen.